Welcome back to another episode of Elevate Your AIQ. Jeff Pohl is the CEO and co-founder of Warden AI, an AI assurance platform that looks for bias and adverse impact in HR and talent technology solutions, where human impacting decisions are made every day. As many of you know, responsible AI is a focus area of this show, as well as my advisory practice, so I was anxious to catch up with Jeff. We talk about what brought him into this important and evolving space, the latest on what Jeff and the Warden AI team are building, and I get Jeff's take on the promise of AI to mitigate bias and increase fairness and inclusivity, if it's designed and used responsibly, of course. As I always say, when it comes to responsible AI, we are all responsible. So enjoy this conversation and please innovate responsibly. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Elevate Your AIQ. I'm your host, Bob Pulver. With me today is Jeff Pohl, co-founder and CEO of Warden AI. How you doing, Jeff?
Hi, Bob. I'm well, thanks. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. Thanks for doing this, first of all. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Just to kick things off, why don't you tell my listeners a little bit about yourself and how you got exposed to AI and what was the impetus for Warden?
Sure. So, my background is in both AI and regulation technology. So, been working in AI for the last just over a decade. Studied at ML and AI at Oxford quite a while ago before it was so popular and prevalent. And then I joined a startup called Onfido, which is an online digital identity provider, which helps bring trust to online platforms and marketplaces, and it uses AI to do that and to meet regulations like KYC and anti-money laundering regulations. And it became really successful. It became a unicorn, did really well, which was a great kind of career trajectory for me. But what struck me in that experience is I was very struck by the fact that we were using this advanced AI technology to do what we did to look at biometric and identity verification to meet regulatory requirements to bring trust to online platforms, and yet nobody ever asked us, at least not for much of that journey, any questions about our AI and whether it was trustworthy, whether it might be fair and unbiased and that kind of thing. And without saying too much, we did look at that ourselves, and it wasn't perfect. We found there's issues that we worked on over time. And anyway, that was the kind of origin of me coming across this other trust issue with AI,
Yep.
And has led me down this path of working on what, in my opinion, is the biggest trust challenge for humanity over the next decade and to come. Can we trust and safely adopt AI? And that's what we're working on at Warden.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I think for those who aren't tech savvy by any stretch, some of that terminology gets jumbled around, even just privacy, cybersecurity, anything that relates to what goes on behind the scenes, I feel like all gets sort of jumbled together. But to your point, regulators and and others who are supposed to be providing oversight should very well know the difference in those or not. Just because you have privacy controls doesn't mean you have cybersecurity controls, and it certainly doesn't mean you can have trust in the way your algorithms and autonomous systems might work. So, can you just give us like the sort of elevator pitch for Warden AI, like where you're laser focused right now?
Sure. Yeah. So our mission is to, in so many words, is to drive safe and compliant adoption of AI, and our role really is to shed a light on AI systems used in high risk use cases, for example, in HR and recruitment, and enable the ones that are responsible and are fair to succeed and overcome the growing adoption barriers that both regulator and customers, ultimately buyers, are asking about. So more concretely, what we do is bring third-party AI assurance to AI systems. So we have a product that becomes embedded into an AI system. Let's say it's a AI candidate matching system in a recruitment platform. And our product connects with that product and does kind of ongoing testing and monitoring, sometimes called auditing of the product, kind of overseeing it to test and assess, evaluate it for how trustworthy it is. For example, one of our big focuses is on bias and how biased or not the AI system is. And then based on that evaluation, we can give feedback and recommendations to the company that owns the AI. But assuming things are good, we help kind of demonstrate compliance with emerging AI regulations and communicate kind of transparency and trustworthiness of the system to customers of that product or to users who might be using it to kind of give this third party perspective that here's how this works and hopefully this is why it's actually trustworthy to use.
So I certainly understand the importance of going through that and doing it as a third party, as an independent third party, to make sure there's neutrality, and obviously it would be hypocritical if there was some bias on the auditor side while conducting this exercise. Jeff mentioned the word assurance, and so just going back to the terminology that's getting thrown around, I see a lot of vendors in this space call themselves like an AI governance platform or an AI, model observability, platform. Could you just give us a little clarity on some of those terms?
Yeah, definitely. So first of all, the terms are in many cases very fluid, right? In this emerging field
Yeah.
of AI trust and safety and compliance. So the way we see the landscape is you've got, on the one hand, those that are very close to being developer tools. So these are tools that development teams will buy and configure and use as part of their process. So that's more like
Mhm.
observability platforms or machine learning operations, ML ops, AI ops tools. And they're usually quite horizontal. It can be used in really any sector or use case because they just have the tools that the developers then use and configure and have to put quite a lot of work in to then help them assess, let's say, bias or whatever issue they're looking at. So that's kind of the dev tool side of things. You then have governance platforms, which can often do more than one thing, but typically, as we see it, it's about internal management of the AI. So if you're a developer who develops an AI tool or even a deployer, you want to put measures and processes in place that make sure you are checking things, that you're making sure the AI is safe from your internal perspective, and then also reporting that you're doing that in terms of upcoming regulations. And that, as we see, is really what governance is about. It's you internally governing this process as a whole. It's mostly about processes than about here are hard technical tests that the governance platform does of that system. And there's a third category, which is auditors, which can mean different things in different people. But we can think of a traditional consultant type person who comes in, looks at how a set of processes works and how a company operates, and the concept of AI, they're looking at the AI processes and ultimately saying, here's how you can improve, or basically, well done. It looks like your processes are quite good. And then finally, where we sit, what we call AI assurance, is actually being a third party that does hard technical testing and monitoring of an AI system to test for trustworthiness. So we actually bring, we have our own data sets. In many cases, we also do work with customer data too, and we are specialists to currently just one sector, which is HR technology, as a specialist to do what we do, rather than being a horizontal governance platform or consultant type auditor who can go in and kind of manually look at processes of any company. So that's our definition, but certainly words assurance and auditing and AI are up for grabs, and a few other people would have different definitions.
Makes me think about talent intelligence and how people have used that phrase very loosely all over the place. If you looked at all the vendors using that phrase, they'd be all over the map, across different categories. But this one's particularly interesting to me. So, as you know, I have gone through a sort of independent auditor kind of certification, and then a specific focus on New York City. But certainly, there's a lot of other areas with much more well-defined, I'll call it, legislation that's hopefully enforceable, and hopefully that triggers people to start being prepared for it, as opposed to waiting for someone to get sued and only then reacting and calling up an auditor to come in. But on the assurance side, I guess one of the things I was curious about is, you said you're focusing on the HR and talent space, but you support anyone who's either building or using those technologies. Is that fair?
That's right. Yeah. So we already work with some of the leading talent platforms, So we've got customers ranging from, startups that are growing fast. One of our first customers was a company called Pop AI based in London, who are growing like a rocket ship right now. Actually, I regret passing a angel investment opportunity with them. And
That's Pop, P-O-P-P?
Pop, Popp AI.
Yeah, I'm connected to them.
Yeah, and they're on well, they do a few things, but they're quite strong on the kind of conversational sort of pre-screening type part of the process. And so that's one example. And then, so startups and even smaller ones than them, right up to I think our bigger platform that we have is Beamery, who many of you listeners will know, of course, been around for the best part of the decade, working with a lot of enterprises. So we work with them, and we're also working with some of their end customers as well to look at assurance of the deployer side, because there's just two kind of angles to AI risk and AI compliance. One is a platform that develops an AI tool has of course lots of responsibility and risk with getting this wrong or getting it right, and then anyone who deploys an AI tool, usually has some customizations. They've got their own jobs, for example, if it's a recruitment context, which itself is its own system ultimately, has its own risks, and so those deployers also need or can benefit from an assurance to help manage those and help demonstrate trust to other stakeholders. So yes, we're working both sides of that equation.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, certainly I knew about Emery because I think Sultan was on
Right.
my show. So basically, you've got observability that sits within a DevOps or MLOps right at the early part of the sort of product development cycle, and so hopefully, of course, those developers have the the literacy and understand how to use those tools properly so that they're being responsible by design essentially. And then, at least in your view, the governance stuff kind of fits into a governance risk compliance kind of framework for the organization, where they're already looking at how, data and privacy and sort of extension of data governance in a way within an organization. But then the assurance is sort of a broader view that might impact, customer, data, or in the case of talent, candidate, data, and being fair with that, with that information.
And the crucial element, at least from our definition of this, is so the third party assurance that we are doing, like our name is on the findings, is on the outcomes that our product, it's continuous, right? It's not like a one off thing, but it's like every week, month, whatever time frame we're testing and reporting on this system, our name is against our findings saying, well, here's the results, here's the metrics that we've tested. It gets quite technical to jump into, and an indication of whether we found any issues or not. And our name is against that and this is why you can trust it, because a third party is doing this, and obviously our background as well is relevant there. Whereas the governance side can very readily just be we internally as a organization have done our own processes mostly, and maybe even some technical tests. Great, but it's internal, like we're marking our own homework essentially, and that's at least one of the fundamental differences with our version anyway of assurance. Like we're assuring that this technology you might want to use is trustworthy to use. Touch wood.
Yeah, I would say if I were acting as an auditor or one of those consultants and advisors that goes in and does like a pre-audit assessment or something like that. I mean, I don't have a data science background, so I'd probably need a tool like Warden at my side to help with that exercise anyway. But certainly, if that were the scenario, I think both our names would be on it, right? Like this is the platform, and this is the way in which we checked these AI tools, one by one, right? Because each one that you're using, whatever the use case, right? Whether it's that upfront screening or it's an interview intelligence tool or it's an ATS, whatever, each one needs its own assurance and audit if that's what the law requires.
Right.
Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to ask you was related to sort of governance and assurance. The law generally, as I understand most of the laws that have been passed and some of the proposed legislation, it's like a periodic check, usually like an annual, check for compliance. But as you know better than me, I mean, these models are changing, constantly. One batch of candidates could be under one algorithm, and then the next batch, 2 days later, could have gone through some tweaked, version of that. So I guess the question is, just want to get your take on like the periodic, point in time kind of assessment versus the continuous monitoring of these, sort of very fluid,
Yeah,
evolving models?
that's a really good question, and it's really important. Yeah, I think that the challenge almost lies in the definition of the words which are being used. Funny, like audit, which is typically like a kind of process thing. We would think of finance and accounting, and coming in, checking the books, auditing the books, and there's only so much, only so frequently that you kind of can or need to do that. And as you're referring to in New York City, local law 144 in particular, there is a requirement of an annual audit to look at bias for automated decisions tools, which is great. A great starting point to bring this third party perspective for sure. But when we think of some of these issues like bias, and you think of looking back over the last year and saying, let's now find out if this system is been biased for the last year or not, and then publish the results. While it's admirable, it's kind of too late, right, to find out at that point. That and worse,
Yeah.
even if like you find out and then you have to publish the results to the world, then worst case it's game over, right? It's like the last year we've processed X number of candidates and we've done it in a biased way and we've now published this to everybody. The potential damage is pretty severe to reputation, and also of course just the actual damage of applying a biased system has been done for the last year. And the other element here to highlight, of course, is that, as many people are aware, technology changes so fast, and AI in particular is super fast, getting faster all the time with Gen AI, and
Visionary voices, bold breakthroughs. This is Shalley's Alley, where top recruiting minds spill their best kept secrets live every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern. Raw, unfiltered conversations on sourcing, hiring, and the future of talent, where we ask the tough questions no one else will. Tune in and level up.
If you're using a Gen AI model under the hood, for example, even if you don't change, the model itself can change. Or if you're using some sort of prompting on top of that, we all know that the prompting, messaging essentially ChatGPT to get it to do something different is so easy that developers are making changes even more frequently than in the past.
Yeah.
So, a higher frequency of testing and monitoring, whether you call it auditing or not, is a terminology thing, is, in our opinion, important to be a credible solution. So yeah, regular testing, and in our approach, ideally by a third party, not just internally. So you get that credibility benefit as well as the actual benefits of flagging anything early are we think important. And certainly we look to the future as this evolves in the next few years. Do we think we'll just be in a place where people do once a year tests and audits, or do you think people will be kind of continuously monitoring it? It's hard not to see it being the latter as time comes.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is just going to go the way of privacy and cybersecurity. I mean, you wouldn't wait. Imagine if you waited a year to see if you had any privacy leaks or cybersecurity, breaches. I mean, that's insane to think about. So yeah, no, that makes total sense. Yeah, and I think the audits. I mean, it's one piece. I mean, you can continuously monitor and then still obviously do the audits. But you're right. Right now, companies are actually incentivized to essentially not post the results of the audit. Right. The New York City law says you have to conduct the audit and post the results. It doesn't say you have to pass, but if your models are exhibiting, adverse impact, and then you publish that, to your point, I mean, you're just airing your dirty laundry and literally publicizing evidence that a candidate could use to file a claim with the EEOC in the case for the states. So it's a very awkward situation there.
And we're seeing a lot more of that, right? There's more lawsuits in this area that's happening, and it's likely it's only going to increase as AI is being used more in this type of process in recruitment, and also people are becoming more and more aware of it. And one of the interesting ramifications that many of the other regulations will also bring, New York City is the one that's in effect at the moment, but we think of Colorado, for example's law that's coming up, and the EU AI Act, of course, which also I know in the US many will subscribe to, even if they're not don't have to. The biggest outcome of those regulations is transparency, and so making sure that any consumers who undergo some sort of AI examination like that have to know about it. Even if you don't have to do an audit or the other requirements are less prescriptive, they're going to be made aware. And once people are made aware of these currently quite kind of hidden AI processes, then there's obviously a bigger invitation to challenge them, often rightly so, but of course not. Sometimes there will be spurious claims, I'm sure, as well. So that's an interesting dimension.
No
I think is likely to become a bigger issue.
Yeah,
The space emerges.
I wanted to go back up to 30,000 feet and just think about AI more broadly in the HR and talent space in particular, because I do think, to your point earlier, in the EU AI Act and their sort of risk pyramid, I think it's still referred to as, but anything related to talent decisions that impact someone's livelihood, whether that's to gain employment, to be promoted, I think it might include even into like learning and development. Like if you're providing unfair recommendations to protected categories in some way, it could fall into this high risk sort of category. But just overall, not thinking about any particular piece of legislation, just this macro view about AI in HR. I'm of the opinion that this is overall a good thing, and that it will increase fairness as we can find the bias, we can find the adverse impact, and we can course correct. That overall, this is a good thing, that we can identify bias before that bias scales and causes far-reaching negative impacts. I just want to get your perspective on what you're seeing, what you're hearing from your clients, et cetera.
Yeah, and to clarify, you mean the potential for AI-based processes replacing human ones, or complementing them, to actually improve on things like bias and fairness in recruitment?
Yeah, I mean, just like its potential to increase overall sort of fairness in hiring practices. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. So yeah, it's such a good point. I think with AI, it's like any technology, it's just a double-edged sword. And certainly for all that our role is to, be the third party that does this technical testing and evaluating other systems, it's actually based on the premise fundamentally that AI can and hopefully ultimately will be a force for good here, right? It's not just that AI is faster and more cost efficient. It can also improve, let's say, ethical considerations, can improve consumer outcomes, and can improve fairness, to your point, so long as it's done correctly, right? And hence why we're trying to play a role there to help with that. That's our strong belief. And I think there's a really interesting parallel in history with probably more than one, but one comes to mind for me is the emancipation of women, particularly in the 20th century, which obviously I'm not saying is a complete process, and there's lots more to do there. But there were significant strides made, particularly in the 20th century. And a lot of that, of course, is down to all kinds of societal shifts and suffragettes and discourse and all kinds of changes in perceptions and things like that. But also, arguably, technology played a huge role, because what happened is there was loads of technological advances, particularly in home appliances, from vacuum cleaners to microwaves to fridges and washing machines, that actually meant that managing the home became much, much more efficient time-wise. And it drove a lot of women, enabled a lot of women to go out to work full time in a way that they didn't maybe as much before. And it's very interesting. And I don't think people maybe recognize that very often, but technology played a huge role in that process. And I think what we could be set up here for, thinking optimistically, is that this big step change in AI that we're experiencing and will over the next decade or two, I think could be maybe the next step change in emancipation, if you will, or increased fairness and diversity across, whether it's just gender or other fairness issues, whether it's race or age or all the types of issues that are prevalent in hiring and other decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly, I think about gender. I think about minorities. I do think about ageism, because I experienced that myself. I do think about hidden talent. We often refer to as hidden talent pools, or underutilized, talent pools, whether that's, older generation of workers who, you and I have talked about this a little bit, like people are living longer, working longer, someone who's in their 50s still could be working at least another 20 years. So it's not like you're a runway fashion model whose career ends at in their mid 30s or what have you, or you're a professional athlete, right? Like there's all these people with second chance, hiring people who have previously been incarcerated and can't find a job because of it. People who are super smart but didn't go to, a 4-year university but are still perfectly capable of doing, most of the jobs that they are interested in that don't require an undergraduate degree, let alone an advanced degree. So I think about all of those things that, if you really are hiring for skills and potential to succeed in the role and to, be a good sort of corporate, citizen, be a good, team player, be a good leader, things like that. I mean, if we're evaluating those things independent of some of those other attributes, then I feel like we're all better off, and we're creating, that fairness will continue to increase. I guess just circling back on Warden in that respect, on the governance platforms, it's generally just gender, race, ethnicity. But you guys are working on going beyond that.
Right.
Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So in our solution, we have obviously sex and race and ethnicity as two of the key categories of bias or protected characteristics to look at and how we evaluate. And particularly New York City law that you refer to explicitly mandates those two for good reason. But we are working on essentially working our way through all the protected characteristics of various different regulations. So actually really pleased to be launching, and actually we already have done this work with a couple of our customers who've been piloting it, a age discrimination kind of age bias detection capability that we've added to our platform. So in principle, it works much the same as the others. It's just we have the data sets now that look at different age groups, particularly differentiating between older and younger age groups. In the US, there's explicit regulation about over 40 being a protected characteristic, which, as you mentioned, is close to a number of us, and particularly as we all work older and longer now, it feels very, very young as a number. And that's something we're adding in, we're launching at the moment, which is super exciting. And it's just really, I'm not here to cast judgment on which form of bias is better or worse than others, but it's definitely a big one. There were studies done from, and this is not to do with AI, this is just like job seeking in general, that's up to 36% of older job seekers, those over 40, get a lower callback rate than younger applicants, which is a really big number. It's like a third is, you're a third less likely to get a callback in some cases just because of your age compared to younger applicants.
A third of an already low number is a low number.
Exactly.
And that's not good.
Right.
That's not good. Yeah.
And also another interesting thing about the EOC is the very first AI bias lawsuit they actually settled was not for sex and gender or race bias, it was for age bias. So a company called iTutor Group had a settlement from the EOC either last year or the year before, because it was unintentionally or intentionally discriminating on older applicants and not giving them a job. So, it's a real issue in the real world, and it's a real issue in AI-powered systems as well. So we're really glad to be bringing this new capability to market and helping and working with our customers to make sure their systems don't have this, and to give assurance to their customers or users that the age bias doesn't feature in their AI system.
I'm really glad to hear that. I remember reading about that case and was just wondering, what's the suit against? Like, what did they violate? Because I wasn't sure. I mean, I know, like you said, there's sort of a age discrimination. There is legislation around that, but the headline that I read implied that this was related to an AI based, law, and I didn't understand how they connected the two if there's no AI legislation currently around age discrimination.
That's a great question. And my understanding, one always needs to double check these articles, but my understanding is that it wasn't an AI regulation that they were being sued against. It wasn't New York City law, for example. And as we know, most other AI regulations are not yet in force anyway. It was just against kind of traditional discrimination law, whichever one it was. Maybe it was a Civil Rights Act.
Okay.
Or it may have been that there's explicit age act in the US, I forget the name of it, that references as over 40. And so, and it's an interesting point, because AI, and people forget this, you think of the AI regulations coming up or recently announced as being the only regulations that AI need to follow. But actually, it doesn't matter what tool you use, whether it's an AI, a person, or anything, if as an organization you lead to discriminatory outcomes based on protected characteristics, it doesn't matter. Like the law prohibits that, and as an employer, you have broken the law unintentionally or otherwise by doing that. And so I'm pretty sure in that case, that's the laws they were talking about, not actually new AI ones that explicitly mention AI can't be age biased.
Yeah.
That's already true. It's just hard to assess that often, and think that what's good about the new AI regulations is they're putting an additional kind of bonus on this, and more explicit guidelines that AI systems and developers have to follow before they can even get to market in many cases.
Yeah, that's an important point, and I know former EEOC Commissioner Keith Sonderling has talked about that countless times, about the fact that part of this to keep in mind is always that point is we've had this longstanding legislation, and whether you're doing it manually or you're using an AI or some other.
Hey, it's Libby DeLucian. If you're sick of business advice that sounds cute but doesn't actually move the needle forward, this one's for you. The Libby DeLucian podcast is where we go one layer deep. No gurus, no glitter, just straight up unfiltered talk about scaling a business, running a household, and holding on to your sanity in the middle of the chaos. If you're the bottleneck in your business or in your own life, I'll show you how to fix it. Simple, tactical, and one layer deep every time. Let's go. Visit libbyd.com and check out our podcast today.
Algorithmic or analytic process to help you make decisions. The same rules apply, right? So you've got to, keep that in mind. And two things come to mind. One is I do think that's really important because so many people are living longer, working longer, and you are potentially discriminating against a significant portion of the working population. I know we put a lot of focus on the upcoming generation, millennials. Well, not even millennials anymore. Gen Z, and we start to think about even Gen Alpha. I think will be in at least middle school, if not high school soon. So we've got many generations to think about in the workforce. I mean, pretty soon you'll have, I think within 5 years, we'll have 5 generations in the workforce, right? So that's a lot. You and I have talked about disabilities as well, and obviously there's pre-existing legislation around bias against people with disabilities, whether that's a physical disability or a mental health issue, or just people that think differently, and thinking about, of course, the neurodivergent population. We've got to be sensitive to these things, and we've got to have some protections for these folks. But just on the age thing, all of this information that we're talking about is sometimes not necessarily disclosed by the candidate, right? Like I don't have to, it's optional for me to say whether I have a disability or whether I'm veteran or whether, or to declare my race and my gender. So what do you do when you just don't have, or your client doesn't have a representative sample of that data to test? And I'm starting to think about the age thing as well, because that's not even one of those optional questions. That's something that you would have to deduce from either the chronology of a resume or what's on a LinkedIn profile, or just looking at somebody that's been doing some work and contributing and publicly disclosing some work that they've done, outside, beyond, high school.
Yeah, it's a good question, and maybe gets a little bit more technical, potential to answer this question technically. But so long story short, we bring our own data in many cases. So we can also, work with customer data, like real historical data that's come through the system that we pull out through our integration with that system, which, as you say, often has the kind of equality monitoring form information, which has some characteristics, but not all of them. So what we do for things like age is we have our own data sets. So depending on the particular system that we're testing, if it's, for example, some resume-based system, which is, or profile-based, LinkedIn profiles and so on, of which many hiring tools use, we have our own real data. We've collected real examples of that type of data with the additional metadata of what their background is. So age is one is characteristic, but we also do look at disability and sexual orientation, religion, and a whole host of them. And we haven't brought fully to market the ability to yet on those, but we will be very soon. So one way is that we have this still real data, but we've gone and got it ourselves, and then we can, with the permission to use it for testing and monitoring, and then we can run that data through the AI, the algorithm, and see how it performs across those different age groups and give results that way. And there's another slightly more complicated technique that also uses your own data, which basically it's called counterfactual analysis. And what we're doing there is taking input examples. Let's say it's a resume example again. Let's say it's my resume, and then we make changes to it, just small changes, keep most of it the same, that essentially stress test that variable. So in the case of age, we might change things like the education dates that someone has, or take them away or add them in. We also, name is the one we would definitely change for gender and race, but we can also do that for name as well. There's a bit of there's data on names based on different age groups, for example. And we would even do more explicit things that would reference some people do put date of birth in or age, not so common, in their resume, like cover letter, or something like that. We would do things like that too, make all these changes, basically making sure we tell the AI in so many words, this person is of an older demographic or a younger demographic, but otherwise keep everything else the same. And so we have these then two examples, the kind of older version and the younger version, and we test the AI system with that and see how the score or whatever the outcome is from the AI system, how it compares across those examples and if it's different and how much different it is. And of course, we do that across a large sample size data set, and then we get a picture of to what extent the AI is essentially implicitly using age-based information to make its prediction, make its outcome. So that's another technique. Like I said, that's called counterfact analysis. It's a little bit, maybe sounds a bit technical. So yeah, basically a few techniques using principally our own data, unless we can also get it from the customer too, to test AI. So it's not trivial, but that's how we managed to overcome it, and excited to bring this to market now.
Very cool. Yeah, no, I'm excited for that. I mean, certainly I don't apply to full-time jobs often, but it wasn't that long ago that I did. And you always wonder, especially because you rarely hear back, you always wonder, well, you wonder a lot of things, right? It's an anxious, process, right? Because if you don't hear back, you wonder why, right? Was it because, I'm an older worker and there's other talent that's just as competitive, if not more so, that is 10 years younger, or is it because I don't you don't even know if your resume was properly parsed and scored or whatever. You're just completely in the dark, so it just leaves you with more questions than answers, certainly. So it's frustrating.
100%.
I guess I just wanted to ask about just your broader view, as you pay attention to the market, not just, target customers and legislation and competition, but like as you think about responsible AI, more broadly and all the facets of that, certainly governance and assurance is part of that. Privacy and cyber, which we've talked about, is part of that as well. But just as people think about responsible AI and being responsible by design, your clients or your prospects express more broader concerns about where things are going, or do they think, are they more just, let's pay attention to what I need to comply with so that I can continue doing what I do, because most of them are not in this space themselves, or like I guess just general observations about what you're seeing as we think about creating a sort of a trusted framework across the talent lifecycle.
Yeah, it's a very interesting time because it has in many ways been a wild west, right? People have been using AI, partly claiming to use it in ways, or claiming it's some advanced AI when it's maybe not. But there's not really been any scrutiny and real concern, I think, from businesses as well about the use of AI. Hence my example at the beginning of where I worked and the lack of scrutiny we faced then. But obviously that's changing, right? It's got this kind of conflicting kind of pressures of motivation to use AI, adopt AI. Like everyone's so excited about it now, and then businesses therefore excited to develop it. At the same time, people are obviously heightening their awareness of the risks, with this being backed up by regulations. So we see quite a range of responses to this. On the one hand, you get people who, just with any new technology, right? There's the early adopters and the kind of mainstream and the laggards. We're seeing the same thing in terms of trust and governance and assurance. So you've got those who embrace it, partly because we want to be really ethical. That's definitely, there are people who just like that. And I'd put people in that category. For example, like they first audited themselves, like, or had an auditor way back 2022, maybe even before there was anything requiring it. And they're just founders just genuinely have a quite unique kind of, you've spoken to them, right, perspective on doing the right thing. But what we're also seeing is some of these early adopters are seeing the business benefits. And that's where we land most well, where it's like the people who see the business benefits as well as the ethical benefits of doing this right. And that we're hoping to drive that too, right? So it's like they will make a big promotion. Ultimately, they will promote themselves as also genuinely true that they care about responsible AI and ethical AI. And here's an actual tangible commitment to that, which is powered by Warden, who comes in as a third party and does all the stuff that we do. And it's a win-win. And so that's good for them. On the other hand, as you've mentioned, there are those who are like, what do I actually need to do? What's the absolute minimum? Can I just do once a year rather than more frequently? And it's like, well, legally that is okay. And so it becomes a conversation about the pros and cons there. So I would say there's a mix as to be expected, but I think it's only going to change as this heats up in this market.
Yeah, I do think as AI literacy and AI readiness improve, responsible AI and like the continuous monitoring will sort of follow the data privacy and cybersecurity track of, we got to keep an eye on this at all times. I think people will realize that once you can bake responsible AI principles and practices into your workflow and your life cycle, that you can be responsible and innovate at the same time.
Right.
Right. No one's not innovating because there's just too much, privacy and cybersecurity, legislation and too many rules or whatever. It's not like people are just throwing their hands up and giving up. I mean, we've seen a lot of innovation happening, and so you can do both. And I think it's just a matter of people finding that balance and getting over some of these initial hurdles and humps.
Definitely. And actually, one last point to add on to that, which is in that spectrum, maybe the one that's the most cutting edge, if you will, is those that, well, look, AI is so powerful now. I'm not a complete evangelist saying it's all perfect and like it can do everything we ever want to do yet, but it is still very powerful, and there's kind of human-based processes that it could partially replace or augment that it doesn't. And the main reason not to is the trust and adoption concerns rather than the technology not being good enough. And so what we're even starting to see a little bit with our customers and the market is those who didn't want it, it was too risky, like do this, and how will people respond, whether regulators or even potential customers, would they even be willing to use this feature? Let's say it's going further up the interview funnel, not just looking at maybe the input resume, but looking at doing the interview, our first interview with an AI. But what we're seeing is people actually going up that because they have more assistance with assurance, with governance to overcome some of those risks and overcome some of those adoption concerns. That's actually enabling them to say, okay, you know what, we're actually going to add this even higher risk AI feature to our roadmap and kind of go up into that and unlock this new use case that we didn't have before. Because we think we've got appropriate safeguards in place. And hopefully that is a win-win then, right? We could bring AI technology safely to these new use cases that maybe weren't being done before. And there's a long way to go, but that's hopefully the trajectory that we, and those aren't just because I don't just mean about us, but I mean even the regulations, right? By defining what's allowed and what's okay, should actually hopefully unlock some more high risk use cases, but in a way that gives confidence to users and buyers of that use case that it's actually okay, rather than being like, this is so risky and so scary, I don't want to go near it.
And the education, the literacy, the readiness. I mean, it's on the buyer side, on the user side too, right? So a more intelligent buyer will select, technologies that have been able to find that balance between responsibility and innovation. And consumers need to follow the same thing. Don't just trust what you see. I mean, as always, we've been saying that for decades. Right? Don't trust everything you read. Don't trust everything that you see. And nowadays, we have to say, the output of generative AI is not necessarily fact. It's not a calculator. So just don't outsource your critical thinking. I guess this is more a curiosity question. Like, I'm imagining that since you do the work that you do, that you're skeptical of a lot of the AI tools that you see. But is there any Are there any particular like use cases or tools, outside of the HR talent domain, outside of the governance domain that you're particularly, fond of or scared of?
Yeah, and you can maybe see from my answers that I like the duality of the higher risk ones where there's genuine risk and fear of me to be concerned, but also the opportunity that those can maybe be, when done correctly, even better than the human way. So I kind of have that weird duality in me. So both come at the same time of fond of and fearful of. I think for me, the one that stands out as really interesting is public sector. In public sector, you've got bureaucratic processes, you've got scale of people applying for things like visas or welfare benefits or marriage license applications, etc. They're essentially text-based in nature, of which LLMs, as we know in the world now, are very good at doing. There's huge bottlenecks. You want to apply to a visa to go to the US, it'll take you a year to get it back for a number of reasons, partly because they just can't deal with the volume, right? In a way that's done well. So obviously, super high risk scenario, so fearful of that as well. But I think there's quite interesting potential for AI, particularly large language models, I think, to get involved in public sector use cases. But there's also a lot of, particularly the UK, I think less so in the US, there's been a number of kind of scandals around not even like advanced AI, just like simple software and algorithms being used in some of these processes before that have been exposed for error and discrimination ultimately. So it's highly, highly risky as well, of course, and it's in the public domain too. So I find that use case both scary but I think one day we'll get there, but definitely need to take our time
Right.
before we slap a ChatGPT into a visa application process.
No, that makes sense. All right, very last question. Any advice for the laggards who have not jumped into AI yet?
I don't know about specific practical advice, but I don't know. For me, it's, I think, important to embrace the change on some level, but also be realistic about it, right? I think what can disillusion people often, whether they're watching others or whether they're doing it themselves, of people who get super excited and go like, this new thing is going to change everything and it's going to happen it's going to happen now, like, let's all do this. And the sad reality with all big technology changes, when you look at the internet or even mobile phones and others, it takes a while for the real benefits to come in, right? The first few years are relatively minor in any kind of real benefit to the world and so on. A few people have it, people will use it. It's maybe 10 years later after the advent of the internet, for example, that really it's a mass adoption and like the world is quite a different place. And I think that'll be the same with this change too, right? We're getting small benefits, nothing too exciting, easy to get disillusioned. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Just keep up generally learning about AI, be more literate, experimenting with it in your own time, using it where you can in business. And then in 5 years, 10 years, there'll be, I think, quite big changes from where we are today, but not so much in the next year or two. It's going to disappoint rather than impress probably in the short term.
No, that's sound advice. Hype cycles are real. Jeff, this has been great. Thank you so much for your time. I think this was a lot of really important nuggets in here for people who aren't sure how to be responsible by design and their use of this technology. So I think we covered a lot of ground. Really, really appreciate it.
Great. Well, thanks for your time. Really enjoyed the chat.
Absolutely. Me too. All right. Thank you again, Jeff. And thank you everyone for listening. We'll see you next time.